Hello Sangha, welcome to the Abbots Address. Today is Friday, September 4th, 2015, and we've got two topics for today's address. One is I want to continue our conversation about the 6 principles of cordiality from the teachings of the Buddha. And the second thing is I'd like to talk a little bit about Ango and what it is and how it functions, particularly as it functions in the community here, because tomorrow is the first day of our 90-day Ango period for the fall. So that's our hope, right? So here we go, the 6 principles of cordiality. Now again, we talked last week about the first principle, which is bodily acts of loving kindness. And now today we talk about the second principle. So again, Ananda, a monk maintains verbal acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards their companions in the holy life. This, too, is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. Now, let's explore this a little bit together and some possible implications of the teaching. On its face, it sounds pretty simple. Okay, I'm going to be loving and kind with what I do with my body. I'm going to be loving and kind with what I do with my speech. We can see how these relate. Body, speech, and mind, right? But sometimes it's not so clear how to do that or what that means, some people wrote me in. Actually, I enjoy that, by the way, parenthetically, when people write in with comments or questions about these Abbots addresses. It's fun. It's fun for me, to feel connected and whatever. It's more of a two-way conversation, but be that as it may. One of the comments came back, it's very interesting. It says, well, can cordiality not just here be a code word for just kind of giving up and going with the flow and being kind of a doormat kind of thing? When, maybe what you need to be doing is speaking truth to power and that kind of thing. How about that? In other words, is it always just about being cordial? And being cordial, can't that be just an escape or a disassociation from, doing the work that needs to be done? So I would say no. I would not say that that's the case. I mean, it possibly could be, but that would be a misunderstanding of the Buddha's teaching, in my view. I don't think the Buddha is teaching us to be doormats and to just get stepped on all over the place. I didn't see him do that. I didn't see Dogen do that. I certainly haven't seen my teachers do that. And I don't. And frankly, if my students ended up thinking somehow that the practice is about being a doormat, then something's gone seriously awry here. Okay, that's not the point. That's not what this is about. It's not some kind of quietistic, pacifistic, have nothing to say that might ruffle a person's feather. Of course not. But there is the other side of that, which is there's a way to engage in difficult conversation that actually is loving and actually is kind and actually does create cohesion and actually does create concord and unity. See? Now let's be realistic about this. I mean, let's say there's a bell curve, theoretically, okay? There's maybe some people at the top of the bell curve, let's just say, that, maybe no matter what you say, they think it's fantastic because they just love you and they just agree with everything you say because they do. Who knows? Let's say that's possible. Well, you discount those people. They don't count in terms of what I'm talking about here. Now, okay, that's one side of the bell curve. Now, the other side of the bell curve down here, these people are going to completely disagree with whatever you say, no matter what, because it's you. And, up yours. No, I don't like you. So whatever you say, no. Okay, that don't count either. Okay, so I'm saying clip off the ends here. The adoring fans, the idealizers, and then the demonizers and the ones that hate you. Fine, they're gone. Okay, because whatever. But the vast majority of people are actually in this big chunk right up here. They really are. And so for that vast majority of folks, those are the ones that I'm kind of talking about here. There's a way to have a difficult conversation. There's a way to make a point that may be unpopular but necessary in your view that actually creates cohesion and creates commonality and creates all these things that the Buddha is trying to promote in the Sangha. It's possible. In fact, I think it's trainable, it's workable. One can learn the skills of how to do this kind of thing. It's also possible to have the conversation, have the difficult conversation in a way that causes just tons of bruising, right? And so maybe you're even right in what you're saying, but maybe the way that you're saying it just causes so much damage that it can't be called loving and kind. And now here's the tricky part. What if you think you're being loving and kind? How do you know if you're not being loving and kind? I mean, maybe you're not. You don't think you're trying to be mean or a bully or anything like that. But how can you tell? Well, one of the ways you can tell is you look at the result. See, we can look at the results. So I go into a difficult conversation, and again, I'm talking about the people that can be influenced and be connected with, right? And if you know, gosh, there's just a whole lot of bumping and bruising and all this stuff that's going on, it might be a clue. Might be a clue. A lot of times we can't see ourselves. We can't actually see. Well, Dogen says it. What we what we see is a creation of our perception at that time. That's how we see the world that we live in, and we think that our actions are a certain kind of way. Now, if you get tons of evidence to the contrary from a lot of different sources that are credible, then we need to notice that and maybe honor the fact that, okay, I'm not really being skillful in this. Maybe I'm not actually being kind or as loving as I think somehow. And that can be a hell of a koan, right? I mean, so then how do I do this? And usually, honestly, I think, if a person is working with this edge of words, it's probably something that's been happening over a long trajectory in the person's arc of development and practice. Okay? So, let's say that. So, let's say normally you're a person who is able to use speech in a loving and a kind way, even if it's a difficult conversation, and it works out. Might be difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but it's loving and it's kind, and the result is coherence. The result is concord. The result is unity after the process is played out, let's say, or even as it's playing out. Let's say that's you normally, but then one day you just lose it and you just don't have it together and you piss everybody off. Boop. Okay, you're human, no kidding, okay? But that's like a single blip along this background of a lot of loving kindness, you see? So that's different than if a person, say, is doing this all the time, and then this is just another example of it. So we have to watch out for those things. When we're practicing with our friends in the Sangha, the person's whole life karma is right there with you. It's right there with them, see? And so we have to be very patient and be very, very, very generous in our spirit, you see, because these karmic forces are very, very powerful, and they start to, they take over the ship. Even if we're vowed to work on this, even if we're very developed in many measurable ways, it's still possible that in this area, not so. So, okay. Now it happens to be that there's a lot of different modern, Western, psychologically oriented insight into what it's like to have speech that actually promotes cordiality and accord and these things, you see. It's not enough to just be brutally correct at any cost. It's not going to influence anybody. Well, it won't be kind, let's put it that way. There's other elements that need to be in there somehow. It's called upaya. It's skillful means, see. So I think, that's one of the qualities I would hope for. That's one of the qualities I would look for. That's one of the qualities I hope to develop more, because there's a lot of contention right now, tons of contention, and there's a general tenor of quickness to anger, very, very short fuse, and quickness to, and I don't know, but I think a little bit differently now than before, but I can't say. It just feels that way to me. So my goodness, if the Sangha could learn to wield words in a way that the Buddha is trying to encourage us to, it would be a major gift, not just for you and trying to help your point get across or whatever, but for everybody. You see, because it's needed. It's really needed right now. So think about it. Look into it, and if you Google search some things, there was a book actually called Difficult Conversations that was a very influential book for me a while ago. I forget the authors right now. I think it's two folks, if I remember right. It's not a Dharma book, but it's just a very insightful book about some of the background stories that actually go on with people when you're talking to them. It's really helpful, I think, to be aware of. And I'm sure there's other books and other models, and none of them have it perfectly spelled out. Unless they do. If you think so, let me know and I'll read that one too. Okay? So, loving, kind speech. Loving, kind speech. Again, a practitioner maintains verbal acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards their companions and the Sangha. And companions, all of us. All of us. This is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. One final thought that keeps occurring, and so I'll voice it, is that if you were to just interpret loving, kind speech meaning to say whatever pacifies whoever you're talking to all the time, then you're just bypassing. You're being dishonest. And it can't possibly be the concord of the Sangha, the way the Buddha is teaching us here. It can't possibly be, because it's based on a falsity, a facade. Not good enough. So, now, a little bit about Ango. Ango is a really important time. It's very historic to the Buddhist tradition and to the Zen tradition. If you Google search ANGO, Ango with Zen in there or Buddhism, Zen usually, you'll find different, Sanghas have literature about it and so on. But the basic idea is that if you just train like complete gangbusters all the time, you burn out. You just will. In fact, it's one of the ways I know somebody's going to quit is when they show up. First time I see them or two, and they're all like, I'm going to commit my whole life to this, and I'm completely dedicated to this, and I'm going to sit more than anybody and study more than anybody, and I'm going to be there all the time. And I'm like, okay, it's been nice to meet you. I know I'm not going to see him again. Maybe once, because it just doesn't work out. Most people aren't that dramatic. Some are. It's kind of fun. Just where they are in their process, okay. But most people that have done this well, and I mean for decades, not years, decades, are folks who have learned how to do the marathon game here. Okay, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Long range thing here, see? So there's times to really turn the heat up and to really make a renewed commitment to dig deeper into your practice for an amount of time, see? Now, we use the 90-day Ango period because that's the kind of an accident of our history, I suppose. The monsoon season and its origin and so on that got converted to monastic practices in China and Japan. And, here we are in America, so fine. It works. It works really well. There's a 90-day fall Ango, here we do, and then a 90-day spring Ango, and it works great. And then there's a 3-month period in between that's the deep winter and the deep summer. Okay? So when you really are committed to turning the heat up for a certain amount of time, that's the time to do that. And then when Ango is done, then it's important actually to knock down, I think. It's important to relax. Not just quit practicing altogether, but to actually just, barbecue and it's fine. Hang out, it's good, So that's the kind of mind of practice that actually sustains. It's the same thing as in a small pattern. If we were to say, if a person, comes to a sesshin, let's say, hopefully, come to sesshin, that's a time of really intense you know, whole body, whole mind, everything just committed to the schedule of training. And then when session is over, sometimes some people like have a kind of a post-session blues that happens because the transition from that intense time to just like being back at home with the cat or whatever is a little strange feeling. And that has a lot to do, I think, with inexperience. You know, you get more experience at how to pull the thread through these times that are more intense and just normal until eventually, actually, they kind of even out and it's the same. And it's basically the same no matter what. That's kind of how it ends up, at least I think. In my experience, I think it's like that. But for the first big chunk of training time, first decade or so, two maybe, then yes, intense, relax, intense, relax. Eventually, they kind of merge out, and you just enjoy the seasons, just cause. Okay, so here in this community, we're not monastic, we're not residentially oriented. Everybody lives in the world, has gigs, and does things. So the way we work it is, you make a personal commitment to, you know, kick your practice up a notch, and you self-define that. What does that mean? I mean, if you're really new to the practice, you know, making a commitment to being at the temple, let's say once every 2 weeks or once a week, and then maybe doing, the Sunday morning classes, and then maybe doing, you know, one heavy-duty retreat in there somewhere. That would be a lot. And then committing to maybe a certain amount of daily zazen. That's got to be in there, I would think, for sure. And maybe if you're, if you sit, some, then now it's time to really do this. Sit. Just enough kidding around. Sit. Every day you make the commitment and do it. And if that's already easy for you, then, well, maybe a little more, right? Maybe add another period in the evening or whatever it is. Now, along with that, there's a certain text or a certain theme that goes along with most Ango. In this Ango, we're using Genjo Koan is the theme of this Ango. The Koan, the Way of Everyday Life, by Master Dogen from his Shobo Genzo. So we'll talk more about that in the times to come. That's the core text around which everything's going to revolve. And kind of in league with that, we have got a core text, a book. This is my copy. It's called On Zen Practice by Maizumi Roshi, edited by, and Bernie Glassman Roshi. And this copy is not what it looks like now. This is from 1976, so this is a little bit of an old copy. They freshened the cover up a little bit, but the content's the same, and it's really good. I mean, I think this is a really good kind of all around introduction and a great text for us to be kind of using. And in the back of it, there's a Genjo Koan chapter in there. So that's the core thing to be reading. Now, additionally to that, if you want to look into Genjo Koan a little more, I'll hold this book up. Okay, this is by Yasutani Roshi, who's in our Dharma family. He's my great-great-grandpa in the Dharma, I'd say. And so this commentary is really excellent. It's the first commentary that I think a Sangha member here should be looking into. Okay, there's a number of them, but let's go with this one as a first hit. Okay, there's a lot in here, and he speaks my mind fluently and beautifully. Okay, now if you finish that, which is kind of a bold claim to make, but let's say you integrate this. Another one that's also good is this one by Okamura Sensei called Realizing Genjo Koan. Now this is another view, but I would say not to go into this one until you've read the first one thoroughly and multiple times and really hung out with it. But then this one is really good too. There's a lot of good insight. Jukai members here will recognize this as the author of Living by Vow, another important book that we hold up. Now it happens to be that we're going to be running the On the Buddhist Path classes, Reverend Dawn and myself, and the text that's the basis for that, since people have asked, is this guy. Now this is called The Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlighten by Tsongkhapa. No, it's not a Zen book. It's a Tibetan book, all right? It's a Mahayana Buddhism, but it's a fantastic source. In the Gelugpa lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, Tsongkhapa is kind of like their Dogen, okay? He's a big, heavy-duty founding character, right? Like in Soto Zen, we've got Dogen. Well, In Galupa, which is the Dalai Lama and these kind of folks, we have Tsongkhapa. Now, why Dawn and I like this is because this sets up a very kind of a basic, clear, logical, step-by-step explanation of the foundations of the Buddhist path and Mahayana practice. Now, Zen is not long on that, and in fact, I mostly agree with Zen's approach. I'd rather have you sit sesshin and see some koans and do oryoki, but also I'd like you to know what's going on. So this is very useful. And also this is very useful actually for people because it gives a kind of a cognitive framework to structure things in. Now, it's not the only possible cognitive framework, I know that, but I think it's a really good one. It's a very useful one. And I'd like to point out that Doan and I have official and formal permissions to teach this. We receive authentication to teach this Lamrim and to adopt it for our Sangha by Gelek Rinpoche of Jewel Heart. So we're not just co-opting a book and deciding. There's a relationship there, and there's been an authentic permission to go ahead and give these teachings and use them. So we're doing that, and that's the basis of the Sunday morning class. Now, you don't need to get Tsongkhapa to come to the class and enjoy it, but if you'd like to delve a little deeper into kind of the behind the scenes what's going on there, that's the resource. Okay, so thank you everybody. Ango starts tomorrow, bright and early. We'll start at 9 o'clock. Is that right? Sunday. Thank you, honey. We'll start Sunday. I think it's at 9 o'clock. 9 to 10 is the class. Yeah, and then 10 to 10:30 is... No, I'm wrong. 9 o'clock is the cleaning. 9:30 to 10:30 is the Buddhist Path class. 10:30 to 11 is beginning instruction and orientation for those that need it, and liturgy training for people who have been around. And then the Sutra service is from 11:30 to 12:30 with Dharma school for the kids and a Dharma talk and all that stuff. Okay? I always get numbers wrong. So, that's the deal. I'm sorry it's been a little bit of a long address, but it's an important one. I hope you take these topics up, and I'll see you in the Zendo. Thank you, everybody.